Hello everyone. My name is John Sierra and I am a Tolkien scholar. That means I am always learning and teaching and studying the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. And it has been a little while since I did a video, and I had a very good excuse. I was sick. I had COVID-19, which really was not fun at all. It was the second time I ever had it. It honestly wasn't as bad the second time, but it was still an experience that I do not recommend. 0 stars. Definitely do not recommend COVID. If you're thinking about trying it, all I would say is don't. But anyway, since I took a bit of a break, I have a lot of catch-up to do. Catching up, I should say. Catch-up sounds like a condiment. And even though there was a few days where I was very sick and I didn't write, there's still 2 weeks worth of questions and such to go through. I've decided to try to be more discerning in picking which of the questions that I would feature in the video, but I still have quite a few. I still have 22 questions to get through, which is less than it could have been, but still quite a lot. But I would like to start with the reading as I normally do, and we're going to read once again from the Fellowship of the Ring. I did the Fellowship of the Ring last week as well, actually, when I read the Balrog section. But today I'm actually going to read, instead of going from the narrative, I'm going to read a poem, and I'm going to read Bilbo's poem that he wrote about Eärendil. And he asked to set the scene for you. It was right when everybody had arrived in Imlad, and Bilbo was sort of pestering Aragorn, who he called the Dunedain, which means, it's the singular form of Dunedain. It's Man of the West of Numenor, and asking him for his help in the poem. And of course, we learned that Aragorn's help wasn't all that much, and Aragorn thought it was actually kind of a cheeky move for Bilbo to write and recite a poem about Eärendil in Elrond's house. But I'm going to read you that poem because it is a very good look into Bilbo's thoughts on Eärendil the mariner. Eärendil was a mariner that tarried in Avernian. He built a boat of timber felled in Nimberthil to journey in. Her sails he wove of silver fair, of silver were her lanterns made. Her prow was fashioned like a swan, and light upon her banners laid. In panoply of ancient kings, in chained rings he armored him. His shining shield was scored with runes, to ward all wounds and harm from him. His bow was made of dragon horn, his arrows shorn of ebony. Of silver was his habergeon, his scabbard of chalcedony. His sword of steel was valiant, of adamant his helmet tall, and eagle plume upon his crest, upon his breast an emerald. Beneath the moon and under star he wandered far from northern strands, bewildered on enchanted ways, beyond the days of mortal lands. From gnashing of the narrow ice, where shadow lies on frozen hills, from nether hearts and burning waste, he turned in haste and roving still. On starless waters far away, at last he came to night of naught, and passed, and never sight he saw of shining shore nor light he sought. The winds of wrath came driving in, and blindly in the foam he fled, from west to east, and errandless, underhand, unheralded he homeward sped. There flying Elwing came to him, and flame was in the darkness lit, more bright than light of diamond, the fire upon her carcanet. The Silmaril she bound to him, and crowned him with the living light. And dauntless then with burning brow he turned his prow, and in the night, from other world beyond the sea, there strong and free a storm arose, a wind of power in Tarmarel, the paths that seldom mortal goes. His boat it bore with biting breath, as mighty as if death across the grey, and long forsaken seas distressed, from east to west he passed away. Through ever night he back was borne, on black and roaring waves that ran, o'er leagues unlit and foundered shores that drowned before the days began, until he hears on strands of pearl, where ends the world, the music long, wherever foaming billows roll, the yellow gold and jewels wan. He saw the mountains silent rise, where twilight lies upon the knees of Valinor and Eldamar, beheld afar beyond the seas. A wanderer escaped from night, to haven white he came at last, To elven home, the green and fair, where keen the air, where pale as glass. Beneath the hill of Ilmarin, a glimmer in the valley sheer, the lamplit towers of Túrin are mirrored in the shadow mere. He tarried there from errantry, and melodies they taught to him, and sages old him marvels told, and harps of gold they brought to him. They clothed him then in elven white, and 7 lights before him sent, as through the Calcarian to hidden lands forlorn he went. He came into the timeless halls, where shining fall the courtless years, and endless reigns the elder king in Ilmarin on mountain sheer. And words unheard were spoken then of folk of men and elven kin, beyond the world where visions showed, forbid to those that dwell therein. A ship then new they built for him, of mithril and of elven glass, with shining prow nor shaven oar, nor sails she bore on silver mast. The Silmaril as lantern light, and banner bright with living flame, to gleam thereon by Elbereth herself was set, who thither came, and wings immortal made for him, and laid on him undying doom, to sail the shoreless skies, and come beyond the sun and light of moon. From Eärendil's lofty hills, where softy silver fountains fall, his wings him bore, a wandering light, beyond the mighty mountain wall. From world's end then he turned away, and yearned again to find afar his home through shadows journeying. And burning as an island star, as high above the mists he came, a distant flame before the sun, a wonder ere the waking dawn, where grey the norland waters run. And over Middle-earth he passed, and heard at last the weeping sore of women and of elven maids, in elder days and years of yore. But on him mighty doom was laid, till moon should fade, an orbed star, to pass and tarry nevermore, on hither shores where mortals are, forever still a herald on, in Eärendil that should never rest, to bear his shining lamp afar, the flamafear of Westerness. I happen to like Bilbo's poetry. He always reads it and then he's like, I know it's not very good, but there you have it, you know. So, but anyway, let's get to your questions. We have a lot to get through. I'm going to try to go through it quickly. I did try to pick questions that I wouldn't have to spend a very long time on. There's still a few that I would, but it's interesting that the reading was Eärendil the Mariner, because the first question is about him. And this one comes from, I hope I'm saying it right, Free Lenu, who asks, how could Elwing have crowned Eärendil with the Silmaril if she was a bird? So, Elwing's transformation, if she was indeed actually transformed at all, was not permanent. It's mentioned that she bore the likeness of a great bird. I'm going to read you the relevant passage from the Silmarillion. Thus Mathros and Maglor gained not the jewel, but it was not lost. For Ulmo bore up Elwing out of the waves, and he gave her the likeness of a great white bird, and upon her breast there shone as a star the Silmaril, as she flew over the water to seek Eärendil her beloved. On a time of night Eärendil at the helm of his ship saw her come towards him, as a white cloud exceeding swift beneath the moon, as a star over the sea moving in strange course, a pale flame on wings of storm. And it is sung that she fell from the air upon the timbers of Ingolot in a swoon, nigh unto death for the urgency of her speed, and Eärendil took her to his bosom. But in the morning with marvelling eyes he beheld his wife in her own form beside him, with her hair upon his face, and she slept. As you can see, this is actually the scene that, well, part of it was adapted into Bilbo's poem. You know? So the likeness of a bird suggests that she wasn't actually a bird, but appeared as a bird. The usage of a great bird, suggests that she was large. She was of large size, perhaps like the great eagles were. Your mind need not boggle at the idea of a bird, especially a large one, carrying one of Feanor's gems. The paragraph goes on to describe that Elwing fainted from flying too fast and was caught by Eärendil, and whatever transformation or possible illusion of transformation faded by the morning, and he saw his wife, Elwing, in her own form. Now, later on, Elwing learned to partially transform herself, giving herself large white wings so that she may rejoin Eärendil on his journeys whenever he came close to her. Okay. All right, next question. This one is from CZ Johnny, who asks, how long did Fingolfin and Morgoth's fight last one-on-one? So Tolkien did not give us any estimation of the time that the battle took. It may have been several minutes, it may have been several days. I think the truth is somewhere in between. Tolkien did not make great descriptions of events in the Silmarillion because the plan was always for the Silmarillion to be sort of a keystone work, a Bible of sorts to spin into other more detailed accounts of each tale, the great tales, as it were. The most important of these tales were Beren and Luthien and the children of Húrin, though Fingolfin's duel with Morgoth did not figure into either of those tales, nor did it really fit into the narrative of the fall of Gondolin. So perhaps a more detailed Quenta Silmarillion may emerge at one point. In fact, Tolkien had, if in fact Tolkien had expanded any part of it, but the likelihood is rather remote. So anyway, in the writing style of the Silmarillion is the reason that the War of Wrath, which lasted for 40 years, was so short in its description, and Fingolfin's epic duel with Morgoth is barely a paragraph. However, from what we know, they were likely fighting for, I would say, a few hours. The reason I say this is because Fingolfin only failed once his stamina failed. He tired from dodging Morgoth's blows and was unable to continue and was pinned down and slain. And it wasn't that he just suddenly became tired, is that he wasn't able to dodge anymore and he started using his shield to block, and that tired him down even more. So knowing the strength of Fingolfin and of course mitigating that with the long ride that he had prior to the battle, I would say it was probably several hours of pitched battle to make him that tired. Okay, next question. This one comes from Luke Cordell, who asks, who is the MVP of the Fellowship in The Lord of the Rings? This is an easy one. Samwise is the MVP. Every member of the Fellowship had a role to play, and some of them were more important than others, obviously, but all of their roles were to assist Frodo in some way or form. Frodo was the key to Sauron's defeat. The forces of good could not win against Sauron, even if he never recovered the One Ring. He was already winning, and he would eventually overcome Middle-earth. Destroying the One Ring is the most significant event of the Third Age, and the only companion to make it all the way with Frodo was Samwise. Now, of course, you may ask, why do I choose Samwise and not Frodo himself? And it's simply because Frodo would have failed on his own. Alone, he would have been murdered in his sleep by Gollum long before he got into Mordor, and Gollum would have taken the One Ring far away from Mordor to keep it forever. Now, while it is possible that any companion could have assisted Frodo in this fashion, the fact that it was Sam, and it was always going to be Sam, while Aragorn and Gimli were quite willing to come along with Frodo, they didn't have the thought that in the confusion following the orc attack that Frodo would slip off alone, and only Sam realized this. He realized that in all this confusion, Frodo is going to slip away. He knew him that well, and he followed. Sam was the moral center of the entire Fellowship, and he carried Frodo, both figuratively and literally, throughout the endgame. Okay, next question. And this one came in anonymously. Could the Silmaril melt if it was thrown into the depths of Mount Doom? No. I was originally going to be like, well, we were not sure, maybe, but probably not. But then when I was doing the research into this one and I thought about it at great length, I had to say, no, definitely not. The Silmarils, we often speak of what they contain, which is the untarnished and preserved light of Lorelin and Telperion. However, it is not often discussed what are they made out of, what are they constructed. Now, in the book The Road Goes Ever On, Tolkien named the unknown substance that Feanor used to create the Silmarils. He called it Selima. So it's a completely made-up thing. It's not a real material. As they are indeed gems, we can state that they are crystalline, and therefore they are rocks, and rocks can melt. The fire in Orodruin was magma, which is molten rock. The reason for my uncertainty at first was that in the discussion of actually destroying a Silmaril, or at least breaking them open, Tolkien wrote several versions of a draft of Dagor Diggeroth, which is the Battle of Battles, the final battle, and it included Feanor's return and the restoration of the trees, the two trees of Valinor. In one version, Feanor broke open the Silmarils himself, because he was the only one that knew how to. In another version, it was Yavanna. And in another version, it was more of a team effort, Feanor's knowledge and Yavanna's power. In the Silmarillion, it was asked of Feanor, would he allow this to happen right after the destruction of the two trees, and he said no. He felt that he would be destroying a work that he could never repeat, which was how Yavanna felt about the trees. And he was also feeling like the Valar were kind of coming at him in a hostile fashion. That was not true, but it's the way he felt at the time. His mind had been poisoned by Melkor. Either way, it was moot. Melkor had already stolen the Silmarils and was already on the way to Middle-earth. But the narrator, who we can understand in universe as being whatever elf originally wrote the text, though it could be Bilbo editorializing, notes that Feanor if he had agreed, his later dark deeds would not have happened, as he would have been in friendship with the Valar. Despite this, upon poring over that section of Quenta Silmarillion, I rediscovered this section, which I'm going to read to you. As the great jewels, they were in form, but not until the end, when Feanor shall return, who perished ere the sun was made, and sits now in the halls of awaiting, and comes no more among his kin. Not until the sun passes and the moon falls, shall it be known of what substance they were made. Like the crystal of diamonds it appeared, and yet was more strong than adamant, so that no violence could mar it or break it within the kingdom of Arda. Yet that crystal was to the Silmarils but as is the body to the children of Iluvatar, the house of its inner fire, that is within it, and yet in all parts of it, and is its life. And the inner fire of the Silmarils Feanor made of the blended light of the trees of Valinor, which lives in them yet, though the trees have long withered and shine no more. Therefore, even in the darkness of the deepest treasury, the Silmarils of their own radiance shone like the stars of Varda. And yet, as they were indeed living things, they rejoiced in light, and received it, and gave it back in hues more marvelous than before. So, no violence shall mar it or break it within the kingdom of Arda is Tolkien's poetic way of saying nothing in the world can harm a Silmaril. Orodruin certainly existed at the time. The volcano's existence dates back to the War of the Valar, so no, Mount Doom would not harm a Silmaril. As an aside, although Dagor Diggeroth is arguably non-canon, just the fact that Tolkien conceived of the Silmarils as being reunited proves that a fiery pit wouldn't destroy one, as Mathros' Silmaril was cast into a deep fiery pit in the earth as well. Okay, moving on. Next question. This one is from Jack Connolly, who asks, within the Lord of the Rings universe, do the people of Gondor pray to the Valar or to Eru? Do they see them as gods, the way the Greeks see Zeus, Poseidon, Athena, etc.? So Tolkien did not speak at great lengths about religion in the Lord of the Rings, in Middle-earth. But we can make some rather educated conjecture based on what he wrote in Unfinished Tales of Numenor and Middle-earth. That gives us a good overview of the likely religious inclinations specifically of the men of Gondor. If we look at the founding of Gondor, we can say that it is a post-Numenorian society, and much of its culture was likely derived from Numenor. Numenor had a religion that worshipped both the Valar and Iluvatar. The Valar got day-to-day worship, but there were some important holidays, 3 of them, that were specifically dedicated to the worship of Iluvatar. There was Eru Caimere, which is prayer to the One, which was in the spring. There's Eru Letale, which is praise of the One, which is in the summer. And there was Eru Hantale, or thanksgiving to the One, which was in late August and was It was late autumn and was more of a harvest festival. So the great eagles were known to show up for these and attend these ceremonies as manways, witnesses. 3 eagles would hover over the king or the queen of Numenor as they were in prayer. Now, Tolkien did not mention if any of these holidays or ceremonies or traditions carried over specifically to Gondor, as the old ways became less respected by Numenor as the time went on, and there was a growing amount of unfaithful who did not speak Quenya, were not in friendship with the elves. They enslaved men in Middle-earth. They even worshipped Melkor or Sauron. Though Eärendil was of the faithful, it was not said that he instituted the same holidays in Gondor, or Arnor for that matter, but it is likely that Gondor in its early days did indeed worship the Valar and Iluvatar, though as Gondor's culture also waned, it likely just fell by the wayside. The only holiday mentioned specifically in Gondor, it was actually in the Fourth Age. They had a non-religious Cormare, which is Ring Day, which was actually Frodo Baggins' birthday. Okay, next question. This came from Elizabeth McDougall. I always enjoy her questions. And she asked, is Lugberz that the orcs keep mentioning located in Minas Morgul or Barad-dûr? Lugberz is Barad-dûr, the Tower of Sauron. Barad-dûr and Lugberz refer to the same place, just in different languages. Barad-dûr is Sindarin. It's derived from Barad, which means a great building or tower, and Dur means evil, so it's evil building, dark tower. Lugberz is the low black speech. It's a bastardized language of Sauron's black speech of Mordor and some orcish dialogue. So in this case, the meaning is similar. Lug is prison and Burz is dark, so dark prison. They're referring to Barad-dûr. Okay. Next question. This one came in anonymously. How is it that Saruman the White is more powerful than Gandalf the Grey, even while Gandalf has the power of Narya? Okay, so this comes up a lot, and I really like to sort of strike this one down. Narya is the ring that Gandalf carries, the ring of power that was given to Maia Círdan, but what power does Narya actually give? Many people love to point out Gandalf's great power from Narya because it's called the Ring of Fire, and they point out many instances where they surmise that Gandalf must be tapping into the power of the ring. However, Narya was not named the Ring of Fire because of it gives you the power to fling fireballs around. It was because it had a ruby gemstone. It was mentioned when the wizards came over the sea. Círdan espied them, and he noted that the White Messenger, referring to Tarandor, who became known as Saruman, seemed to be the leader. Círdan's gaze, however, was drawn to the Grey Messenger, Olorin, who we come to know as Gandalf, and he seemed older than the rest, and he was leaning on his staff. But he did seem the wisest to Círdan, who was an excellent judge of character. The wizards were never young, but they didn't come over as old men, except for Gandalf. Saruman was even said to have magnificent black hair in that time, but Gandalf was already appearing older. Círdan gave his ring to Gandalf, and I'm going to give you the quote from Unfinished Tales. "For," said he, "great labors and perils lie before you, and lest your task prove too great and wearisome, take this ring for your aid and comfort. It was entrusted to me only to keep secret, and here upon the west shores it is idle. But I deem that in days ere long to come it should be in nobler hands than mine, that it might wield for me the kindling of all hearts to courage." From this quote, we can see that Narya's true power is the aid and comfort to Gandalf, and that he can give aid and comfort to others. In another version of the same quote, which was in Appendix B of The Lord of the Rings, Círdan mentions Narya will support you in the weariness you have taken upon yourself. Gandalf has taken the form of an older man than even the other wizards, and he will be tired, and he will be cold, and he will need vitality and warmth. As mentioned earlier, the kindling of all hearts to courage. So that's really what the ring is doing for him. Okay, here's the thumbnail one, and this one actually came in anonymously. What happens to the Mouth of Sauron after he flees from Aragorn in The Return of the King? And if you're thinking to yourself, well, didn't Aragorn kill him? That was just the movie. That didn't happen in the book. The mouth is not seen again, and we do not know what happened to him. The mouth appeared only in the one scene. He parleyed with Aragorn and Gandalf. He mostly mocked Aragorn and the company that had come to Moria, though Aragorn made no reply. The mouth felt threatened merely by his presence. With only a stare from Aragorn, the mouth cowered and shrieked that he was a non-combatant diplomat not to be attacked under the rules of war. Gandalf assured him that no one was planning on attacking him, though once the battle started, he would be in grave danger. It is not mentioned after he fled back where he went. The battle started as he was on his way out. So I don't think he took part in the battle because he was a coward. He almost certainly would not have fought. He couldn't even deal with Aragorn staring at him. So I don't imagine if Aragorn came at him with a sword, he would have stuck around for that. The forces of Gondor didn't invade Mordor. They stayed at the gate, so they didn't follow him wherever he went. Sauron himself tried to enter the battle, but he found that his power had become impotent because the ring had been destroyed, and his frame was blown away by the wind. Either way, the mouth is unaccounted for, and it is possible that he's sort of a loose end that Tolkien may have picked up on in the proposed sequel to The Lord of the Rings called The New Shadow, that he wrote a very small bit of before abandoning the idea. The Mouth of Sauron may have had some sort of part in that sequel. Okay. Oh, I am sorry about that. I did not mean to do that. I was trying to move the recording software over, and I accidentally moved myself over. Okay, next question is from Friggy Lenu, hope I'm saying that right, who asks, which of Túrin's many names did Finduilias scream as the orcs led her away? Tolkien did not specify, but she would have called him Túrin. Though asked by Gwyndor to protect Finduilias, Túrin didn't do that. He was entranced by Glaurung and believed that if he protected Finduilias, he would never see his mother or his sister again. Finduilias was waylaid by orcs, and she was killed by one of the orcs skewered her with a spear and right into a tree. She was pinned to the tree. Nothing is nice in The Children of Húrin. It's a very rough book. It is mentioned in two different passages that Finduilias called out to Túrin by name, but it did not mention which of the names she used. I'm going to read you two passages from The Children of Húrin. Here's the first. And among them was Finduilias, and she held out her arms to Túrin and called him by name. But not until her cries and the wailing of the captives was lost upon the northward road did Glaurung release Túrin, and he might not stop his ears against the voice that haunted him after. Here's the second one. And Túrin hastened along the ways to the north through the lands now desolate between Narog and Tieglin. And the fell winter came down to meet him, for that year snow fell ere autumn was past. And spring came late and cold. Ever it seemed to him that he heard the cries of Finduilias, calling his name by wood and hill, and great was his anguish. But his heart being hot with the lies of Glaurung, and seeing ever in his mind the orcs burning the house of Húrin, or putting Morwen and Nienor to torment, he held on his way, turning never aside. So, it says she called him out by name, but it didn't mention what name she used. But earlier, when they first met, Finduilias did call him Túrin. She called him Túrin, son of Húrin. So that would likely be the name that she knew him by, and as the orcs were closing in on her, she would have called out for Túrin by his true name. All right, next question. This one's also anonymous. How did the Balrog enter Moria when the dwarves possessed it during the First and Second Age? So the Balrog didn't actually enter Moria. It entered the caverns that were beneath Moria. The Balrog who survived the War of Wrath, all of the Balrogs that survived the War of Wrath, we don't know how many, it couldn't have been more than perhaps 3 of them, were said to use the tunnels underneath Angorodrim to escape and to find deep, dark places to hide and to slumber. The one that we call Durin's Bane wound up beneath the dwarven city of Khazad-dûm, which is also called Moria. The thing is, the city expanded as the dwarven population grew, and as they mined for more mithril, they dug deeper, and they eventually struck the chamber where the Balrog lay and disturbed his rest. So while the city was already there, the mines had not yet dug that deep. Okay, next question. This one is from Miles McGrath, who asks, if you read the Lord of the Rings books after you had watched the movies, does it change your opinion of the movies? So, this doesn't really apply to me, because I had read the books many times when I saw the films, but since I was asked specifically to answer this question, I will do the best I can. I had read the books many times before I saw the films, and I can't say that reading it afterwards changed my opinion of the films, and I should talk about that. I get accused sometimes, on Quora especially, by some people that I have to say are not that bright. They tell me, oh, you have a grudge against the films, because I'll critique certain parts, or I'll point out certain flaws in the films. Now, shockingly, I know this is shocking to some people, but shockingly, you're allowed to make critiques of films, even if you like the film. You can critique it still. Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings was considered as close as we'll get, and will likely remain that way for quite some time, I think. That doesn't mean that they're perfect. The films did do a few things to our collective consciousness, I think, of the books. And it's a shame. And that's not really the movie's fault, it's the audience's fault. It's perfectly reasonable for some of the characters of lesser importance to be left out of the films. But it seems that because certain characters were left out of the films, that people have generally forgotten that these characters existed. And I'm not just talking about sort of the one-off elves from the Fellowship of the Ring, like Glorfindel, Eärendil, Gildor. I'm talking about some of the men even, such as Imrahil. Prince Imrahil is very prominent in The Return of the King, and we don't get any of him. And not just him, but also the King of the West, well, not the King, the Lord of the Westfold, Erkenbrand, was fairly important in the Two Towers specifically, but is completely left out of the films, which is fine. But at the same time, it seems people have forgotten about Erkenbrand, they've forgotten about Imrahil, and of course, Gildor and Eärendil and Glorfindel. I feel like certain aspects of the books have diminished in pop culture, in our consciousness of the books, and that's a shame. I've had people who have, I know, 100% have definitely read the books several times, try to correct me on certain things, and it turns out that they're remembering the movie. They'll say something like, well, wait a minute, this is one that I remember, because we were talking about whether Samwise was overweight, and I said that if there's any character, any of the hobbits that was a little on the chubby side, it would have been Frodo, not Sam. Because I said Sam was in very good shape. He was an outdoorsman. He worked with his hands. He would have been, and not being wealthy, he would not have always gotten those 6 meals a day that Frodo was enjoying. And somebody says, well, wasn't there a part where Gollum called him fat? And I said, well, in the movie, yeah, because he was played by Sean Astin, who's sort of I wouldn't say he's a fat guy, but he's a full-figured guy. He's got sort of a chubby face. And I believe he may have even been wearing a bit of a padding when he played Samwise. I could be wrong on that. But we remember that stupid fat hobbit. We remember that. And it's such a memorable scene that some people have thought, well, that must have been in the book. Especially since so much of Gollum's dialogue was from the book. And then I'll say, no, that was the movie. And they'll be like, oh, right. Even I've misremembered things at time. I'll remember something from the movie. I'll catch myself. I'll say, well, wait a minute, let me check. And I'll check the book. Whether I grab a copy that's sitting next to me or use my PDF copy is more likely, because I can search very quickly through it. So it actually speaks to the overall quality of the films, that they're that good, that the films are the Lord of the Rings for an entire generation. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I just wish that more people remembered the aspects of the books that weren't in the films. Okay, next question. This one came in anonymously. What happened to Morgoth's original hammer, Grond? Can it be found in Middle-earth? So I love talking about Grond because there's almost no information about it, which means it's wide open for interpretation. Grond was a hammer that Morgoth used in his battle against Fingolfin. It was called the Hammer of the Underworld. But the word Grond means weighty, but not in the way that it refers to the hammer actually being heavy, but it means weighty as in ponderous, a serious discussion. I pointed out this sort of linguistic pun on Quora once, and I got a comment, which I wish I could find, because I would love to give this person full credit. It wasn't me that came up with this, but somebody called it the debate club. And I think that might be the funniest joke ever made in a Tolkien discussion. So anyway, the debate club. Anyway, Grond was never mentioned again, except for the fact that the battering ram used to smash the walls at Minas Tirith in The Lord of the Rings was named Grond, and it was mentioned that it was named after the Hammer of the Underworld. Morgoth didn't fight all that much, and when he did, or he needed a weapon, he tended to grab whatever was handy, or whatever weapon fancied him at the time, such as the spear that he used to destroy the two trees of Valinor. That was never mentioned again. So if I was to guess what became of Grond. I would say that after the War of the Wrath and Morgoth's capture, it was probably discovered in Angband and sort of bagged and tagged and taken back to Aemon, where we have our top elves working on it. Top elves. Okay, next question. This one also came in anonymously. What is the secret ingredient in Lembas bread that makes it so filling? I'm going to make this very simple for you. The secret ingredient is magic. Lembas bread is a type of cake that is said to be made from silver corn derived from the Undying Lands. And keep in mind that when Tolkien used the term corn, he was referring to the broad sense of any sort of cereal grain. The Vala Yavanna created it, and the art of creating lembas was taught to certain important elvish women. Elvish men were not allowed to know how to create lembas. It was something that was only women did. And it was usually passed down from mother to daughter or to female proteges. Galadriel likely learned the art of cooking lembas bread from Melian. And Galadriel was likely the last elf in Middle-earth in the Third Age who knew how to make these cakes. So Tolkien pointed out a few times that trying to discover exactly what makes lembas work is futile. Its properties are not nutritional, its properties are magical. Okay, next question, another anonymous one. Why didn't the Valar just come and pluck Sauron out of Middle-earth? I understand they caused some serious destruction when dealing with Morgoth, but Sauron is not Morgoth, is he? Would directly intervening really have caused that much damage? So it seems obvious. One of the Valar, like say Orome or Tulkas, could have come across the sea, grabbed Sauron by the scruff of his neck, and dragged his sorry butt back to Mandos. But the truth is it wouldn't have worked. And I'll tell you why. Because the coming of a Vala to Middle-earth would not be an event that would go unnoticed. As soon as one of them set foot on Middle-earth, Sauron would simply hide. And he was really good at hiding. He knew all the dark places where they would not find him, and he had used this in the past. After the War of Wrath, I'm sorry, not the War of Wrath, but after the War of the Valar, all 14 Valar together could not find Sauron, and they could not find the Balrogs either. And it was mentioned that there were many underground tunnels and fortresses that Morgoth had created. Well, it wasn't called Morgoth yet. Melkor had created that they were unaware of, and that's why they didn't find the Balrogs. That's why they didn't find Sauron. Sauron would have just gone to ground and waited for the Valar to leave, and then he would have resumed as normal. He may have even gone into Moria and hung out with Durin's Bane for a while, and then he'd have a very powerful ally. So that's why it would be bad. Okay, I have another question from Elizabeth McDougall. What does Imlad mean in Elvish? Imladris is Rivendell. Yeah, we know that. But Faramir warns not to drink the water from Imlad Morgul. Is Imlad just valley? Why does Imladris one word, but Imlad Morgul is two words? So you are correct in your thinking that Imlad refers to valley or vale. The difference is that Imladris is the name of a place. It's sort of a proper noun. But Imlad Morgul is a description of a place. Imladris is derived from the Sindarin word Imlad, which means valley, and Chris, which means cleft. So the literal translation is Valley of the Cleft, which became in Westron Kerungul, and then in English we say Rivendell. Imlad Morgul is Vale of Sorcery, but it is a description of a place rather than a proper name. The name, there was a river there, Morgulduin, the River of Sorcery. In telling someone not to drink from the River of Sorcery, but referring to it as Imlad Morgul is like saying, is like Faramir saying, don't drink the water that flows out of the evil valley. Keep in mind that Faramir is also speaking likely a very different dialect, Gondor Sindarin, which is different from Elvish Sindarin. Okay, good one. Next question is from the Oski Boski. Now, the Oski Boski loves a lot of hypotheticals, and this one is interesting. Could Sauron have been defeated in the Third Age if he did not make the One Ring in the Second Age? Probably, but not by conventional military means. Sauron not creating the ring means that there's an incredibly different timeline. I'm not so certain that Sauron without the ring could have been defeated at the end of the Second Age. The Last Alliance would have been stronger because Eregion would have been around. They would have had the likes of Celebrimbor's arms and armor. Furthermore, without a ring to separate Sauron while he was down, Isildur had no way to prevent Sauron from just getting back up in a few minutes and resuming the battle or fleeing back into his tower. If Isildur survived, the disaster of the Gladden Fields does not take place because there's no ring. Going into the Third Age, we get a very different Saruman. He's not tainted so much by lust for the One Ring. Isildur would have set up Elendil's kingdom properly, and it would not have fractured, and the system of having two kings and a high king would have continued. This may even mean that without the region of Arthedain being mostly empty, the Shire may never have existed. So, changing something like this, it creates a butterfly effect that dissolves the rest of the story going forward. This is why what-if scenarios are not really cut and dry. Sauron would be more powerful in the Third Age due to never having been separated from his power, but the forces of good would also be greater without the One Ring mucking things up. Even assuming that things go mostly the same, Bilbo doesn't survive his journey without the ring, the dwarves don't take back Erebor, and Smaug survives, or maybe Gandalf finds another method of getting rid of Smaug, or maybe Smaug flies to Mordor and joins Sauron. There are too many variables to say definitively what would have happened. All right, next question. This one's really cool. It's an anonymous question, but not many people ask me about this specific story. And this is asked: what do avid Tolkien readers think about the Númenórean love story Eldarion and Eärendil, the Mariner's Wife? I would question your assessment of it being a love story. It kind of is in a way, but not between those two, not between Eldarion and his wife. The Mariner's Wife is not really a romance. Beren and Lúthien's a romance. The Tale of Aragorn and Arwen is a romance. The Mariner's Wife is almost anti-romantic. The story does involve a courtship and a marriage, but Eldarion neglects his wife, and she can't get him to settle down and spend time with her. He ostensibly does love her on some level because he did marry her, but if there's a love story, it's between Eldarion and Middle-earth. That's his true love. Eldarion neglects his wife, he neglects his daughter, he barely knows his daughter, and his kingdom as well, because he does become the king, to visit his true love, his mistress, Middle-earth, on many occasions. Now, by comparison, the king and his wife have a bitter divorce, and they struggle for control of their daughter, whom Eldarion recognizes as more like him than his wife, or his ex-wife now. And he even alters the laws of Númenor so that his daughter may become queen. Now, out of all of the stories in Unfinished Tales, this one is like the most unfinished. And you really can't construct it into a final, complete narrative because Tolkien never wrote an ending. The text just sort of cuts off abruptly with a very sort of apologetic note from Christopher Tolkien, he tries his best to sort of tell us what might happen after this. We never really get a true resolution. That's not to say that it's not worth reading. It's a fascinating story, especially for being one of the most fleshed out tales of Númenor before the fall. My own reading of the tale was mostly, dismay, because it just stops right when it's starting to get really good. Okay. Next question, is Aragorn a descendant of a Maia? Yes, he is, absolutely. You know that Aragorn is the descendant of Isildur and also Anarion, and of course their father, Elendil. But going further back, we can trace through all the kings of Númenor all the way back to Elros. And then, of course, Elros's mother was Elwing. And then we go from Elwing's ancestry. Her father was Dior, who was the son of Beren and Lúthien. And then, of course, Lúthien was the daughter of Thingol, who is an elf, and Melian, who was a Maia spirit. So yes, Aragorn is very distantly descended from one of the Ainur. Okay, next question. This one comes in from 3 times Elizabeth McDougall. She gave me a lot of good questions recently. Is it possible that the Arkenstone is a piece of the destroyed northern lamp Illuin? No, I'm going to say no. There are 2 main reasons why I believe the Arkenstone cannot be a piece of Illuin, much like it can't be a Silmaril. For one, just like the Silmarils, the lamp was hollowed by the Valar, though in this case it was Manwë who hollowed it, whereas it was Vardar that hollowed the Silmarils. Hollowed objects would burn evil, so Smaug wouldn't have wanted the Arkenstone around in his hoard. He would have chucked it away, or at least smacked it so that it would be kind of far away from him. It wouldn't have been in his main treasure chamber. The second and the most important reason, though, is the location. When Illuin fell, it created the inland sea called Helcar, which is the bay where Cuiviénen was. The entire region was said to be destroyed by the changing of the world, which is changes made by both the War of Wrath and the Akalabeth. The origin of the Arkenstone is really simple. It was a large gem of high quality that was found in Erebor by the dwarves, and then they cut it into a jewel. It does not give off its own light like a Silmaril or like the lamps did, but it shines with reflected light. Thorin lovingly described how it catches different types of light and glows in different situations. If Illuin was the predecessor to any important object, it would be Telperion and then the moon. All right, next question. We're almost done. I can't believe, like I said, I tried to pick ones that I can go through quickly, and I can't believe that with 22 questions, we were going to get this in under an hour. We're only at 45 minutes here. Okay. Another anonymous one, and another quick one. Did any men ever meet some Valar in Middle-earth? Well, 3 mortals have met the Valar. 2 of them are half-elves, and it wasn't in Middle-earth. Eärendil and Elwing were both mortal half-elves, and they did travel to Valinor using a Silmaril to get through the veil of mist and confusion that prevented people from going to the Undying Lands in that time. They were spared because they had elvish ancestry, though they had to choose between mortality and immortality, and that choice was visited upon all of their descendants who had at least one elvish parent, which is why it was visited to Elladan, Elrohir, and Arwen, but not to Elros's children, because Elros had a mortal wife. Now, before this, though, there was a man, a mortal man, who met one of the Valar, and it was in Middle-earth. There was Tuor. He came to the sea, and he met Ulmo, and he was given a mission to travel to Gondolin. Mortals weren't supposed to commune with the Valar. They weren't supposed to live in Gondolin. They weren't supposed to sail west by invitation, but Tuor did all of this. And Elvish legend says that he became immortal upon sailing west, the only mortal without Elvish ancestry to do so. Okay. All right, only 2 more questions. I like this one because it's about Treebeard. I love talking about Treebeard. It's an anonymous question who asks, why did Treebeard refer to Saruman as young Saruman in Chapter 4 of the Two Towers? Yeah, he did do that, and it's for the same reason that a bit later he refers to Gandalf as young Master Gandalf. As far as Treebeard knows, he's older than the wizards. Saruman and Gandalf are older than time. They're older than the universe itself. They're angels. They were among all the angels that sung the universe into existence. But Treebeard doesn't know that. Very few beings in Middle-earth know the true nature of the wizards. Círdan, Galadriel, Elrond are the ones that we know for sure. And with Galadriel and Elrond, it's because Círdan told them. And we could assume that if Galadriel knows about it, then certainly Celeborn does. She would have told him. And those who witnessed Gandalf's return and heard his account of how he had in fact died and returned would have probably figured it out. And we can say for sure that Bilbo knew, because Bilbo wrote the Silmarillion, or at least he translated it. So he would have recognized Olorin as Gandalf in that sense once he did that. As a matter of fact, the very last bit of the Silmarillion is called Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, and mentions Gandalf many times as Mithrandir. So anyway, as far as... And we know that that account was actually written by Elrond, and it was translated by Bilbo. So as far as Treebeard goes, Gandalf and Saruman came around 1000 of the Third Age. Some accounts of the wizards coming earlier, but I think that mostly refers to the blue wizards. Now, Treebeard can remember the Spring of Arda. He can remember the Elves awakening, the Men awakening, the fall of Beleriand, the changing of the world, all these major events that happened way before the Third Age. So Treebeard has been around longer than Gandalf from his perspective. Gandalf isn't about to correct him, and Saruman wasn't there to correct him, and I'm not sure Saruman would have corrected him. He would have just been like, who knows. So, yeah, as far as Treebeard knows, he's older. And here's our final question. In The Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, what function did the cursed undead from the past serve overall in The War of the Ring? In the movie, they seemed very ex machina. So I just have to correct you on one thing. When you say ex machina, that means from the machine. Deus ex machina means God from the machine, and it would refer to in old plays. God would save the hero out of something that, the writer couldn't figure out how to get him out otherwise. And there would be a rudimentary machine that would literally lift the hero up, and it was meant to be God lifting the hero out of danger. So it was a machine. God was a machine because a machine was, a simple machine, of course, was lifting the actor who was in the play. So when you say ex machina, you're just saying from machine. So you want to really either say the whole thing, Deus ex machina, or just say Deus ex. Yeah, getting past that. In the book, the dead men of Dunharrow, or the Oathbreakers, they didn't do quite as much as they did in the film. They didn't actually fight, and they didn't show up in Minas Tirith. They gathered behind Aragorn as he traversed the path of the dead, and they finally surrounded his party at the Stone of Eric. And Aragorn declared who he was, and he asked if they would fulfill their oath, and they said yes, they would. Aragorn then led the Oathbreakers south to the sea, where they used their power, which was fear, to drive off the corsairs of Umbar that were preparing to sail up the river there to Minas Tirith, which was going to reinforce Sauron's army. The Oathbreakers dissipated upon fulfilling their duty, and Aragorn freed the slaves on board the ships and took command of the ships. Now, also, it was mentioned in one of the comments, and I want to, and this was a good point that somebody made. Let me see if I can give a proper attribution here. Here it is. Samuel Becker pointed out that the Corsairs were also preventing certain men from reaching Minas Tirith to assist them. So that was another thing. All these other vassal states didn't send as much aid to Minas Tirith as they could because they were locked in conflict with the Corsairs of Umbar. So that was another reason why this was important for Aragorn to do. But anyway, why is the Dead Army? Why are the Oathbreakers so important? It's not just because Aragorn needed them specifically, but it fulfilled a prophecy. Aragorn's bloodline claim to the throne of Gondor is tenuous. Denethor even mentions specifically that Aragorn was only descended from Isildur, and Denethor did not consider Isildur to be a king of Gondor. Technically, he was a high king of Elendil's realm, which included Gondor, but Denethor was thinking of the kings of Gondor starting with Meneldil, a Naryan son. So he's thinking he's not descended from a Naryan except through the female line, through Firiel, who married Arvedui, was an heir of Isildur that tried to become the king of Gondor, and he was denied. So, because of this, Aragorn was not about to be recognized as king so easily, but part of the reason he was able to become the king is because he fulfilled a lot of prophecies. Healing, winning the War of the Ring, there's just too many to mention, and one of them was freeing the Oathbreakers, because they could only be released by the true king of Gondor. So, there's a reason it's called the Return of the King, because almost everything that Aragorn does is fulfilling a prophecy. He wears the elf stone. He has the sword that is reforged. He had healing hands. He freed the Oathbreakers. I could list and list and list, and there were probably some that I forgot. There were so many different things that Aragorn did that only the true king could do, and some of them even happened after his coronation, such as the flowering of the white tree. But anyway, I digress. So, I'm back. We're going to get back into weekly content. As a matter of fact, we're actually going to get back not only into weekly content, but into bi-weekly content, because I have some videos that are not necessarily question and answer videos. You're going to see what they are very soon, that I'm going to be uploading probably on the weekends, while we're going to continue the question and answer videos on Wednesdays. So for a little while at least, we're going to have 2 videos a week. So keep an eye out. I'm probably going to, probably Saturdays, I'm going to upload the other type of video, which I have a bunch already ready to go. So send me your questions, leave me some comments, and if you got this far in the video, you must be enjoying the content. So if you haven't already, subscribe. Make sure that you do all those extra hoops that YouTube makes you go through. The bell and all that, right? Give me a like. Give me a comment. Help me out with some engagement here. We're trying to grow the channel. We'll see you guys next time.